Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Great. That was just covered, but welcome to my talk. You aren't always right. Resolving technical disagreements the easy way. So, who am I? I'm an open source developer. I am, on the side, a full-time university student. I've been coding since I was young, but I started working in open source at about 13. Started with Python, moved to C++, and now I work basically exclusively in Ruby. I worked on Chrome Brew, Rubocop, and Dolphin. Me, seen here. I'm not on that side of the screen. There we go. So, why me? Why should you listen to me? Yes, I started working in open source at a young age, but at an immature age. I made a lot of mistakes, I started conflicts, but I've learned a lot from them. And I've worked on teams ranging from the completely, totally unorganized to the kind of organized. And as part of working on a package manager, which is Chrome Brew, I've upstreamed patches to a wide variety of... Little closer? Sorry. I've upstreamed patches to a wide variety of projects, and technical disagreements had held these patches back, in some cases up to decades prior, so I know a little bit of what I'm talking about. Just a brief overview of what I'll be talking about today. What is a technical disagreement? Why is it important to resolve them? Some strategies to resolve them, so reduce the scope, identify the reasoning, bring in an outside perspective, change the context, and reconsider your own opinions. And then there'll be a conclusion, some brief examples of how not to resolve technical disagreements, and then if we have time, some Q&A. So, what is a technical disagreement? A disagreement about code or something related to code. So most likely it'll be a pull request review, or it could be someone reverting your pull request, or just a passive-aggressive in-code comment like some idiot wrote this code, or any other place where you have disagreements, IRC, Slack, Discord, Matrix, Zulip, whatever it is you use. Now, some things that are not technical disagreements, and I cannot help you with. If someone tells you to show up to meetings on time and not call your users gnats, or don't put your gym clothes in the work freezer, you're on your own for those ones. Why is it important to resolve them? Resolve them easily and in a timely manner. Actually get your changes merged. It's a big one. If you're stuck in review hell, nothing happens. Avoid wasting time and effort. If you and another developer cross purposes and you write opposite code, then you're just duplicating and you're wasting time. Have everyone working towards a common goal. I've kind of covered that, but it really helps if everyone is pushing in the same direction, all wheels in the car are driving forward. And ensure they don't spiral out of control. An example of this, I won't go into too much detail to protect the privacy of those involved, but an argument about compiler versioning I had with someone led to them, along with a few other things, quitting the team. They were our infrastructure guy in the middle of an infrastructure transition. That is not an ideal outcome because we had all the broken infrastructure, so good to avoid that. And just maintain a happy and collaborative environment. If everyone's arguing all the time, then you're less likely to get things done, and it's no fun. So, with that said, how do we resolve them? First, you reduce the scope of this agreement. So find out actually what specifically they disagree with and work from there. Go from, they don't like your pull request, they don't like this file, this change this one line. It's much easier to solve a disagreement if the disagreement is smaller. Compare the reasonings behind the opinions. So it's much easier to find agreement when you're working from a shared base of fact and logic and you actually compare notes, not just, I think this and I disagree. Bring in another perspective. Democracy is good enough for most of the world. It's probably good enough for your code base. Bring in a third or a fifth or a seventh opinion and just go with the majority view. Change the circumstances. So there are a number of reasons why someone might disagree with your code. They might have had a bad day. They might not like the rest of your pull requests, they might just be angry or upset, or you might be angry or upset. So if you change the circumstances, you can eliminate any of those additional reasons why they might disagree with what you're doing. And then a classic, realize you're wrong, right? The talk is titled, You Aren't Always Right, and it happens. I've been wrong 2 or 3 times, some of you may have been wrong 3 or 4 times. It happens to the best of us. Like sometimes the reason you can't get them to agree with you is because you have the wrong perspective, and of course they won't agree with you. With that said, let's get into some examples of these techniques in action. It just is a collection of me using these to resolve disagreements. People are human, these aren't magic, but if you combine them with some empathy and some common sense, they go a long way to letting you spend less time arguing and more time coding. So, this is the description of a pull request I opened in April 2024. The goal is to split out the implementation of the upload command from our bin crew monolith into commands upload RB, doing a little bit of refactoring and making some small behavioral changes along the way. The description is there. It's not too bad. Nah, it's no fun. I like coding. I don't like AI. Outlined in red are all the changes that people disagreed with. So initially, I tried to resolve these disagreements the old-fashioned way by proving that I was right and they were wrong. 41 comments, and 2 weeks later it became clear this is not the method. It's not successful and it's unproductive. So let's start by reducing the scope. Let's focus on just this one. So these are the comments entailing the technical agreement over these specific changes. It's still kind of not ideal, but reducing from 41 to 4 has certainly helped. But it's clear that this is still, on its own, not going to be enough to get it resolved. So let's change the context. 2 weeks later, I submitted a new pull request containing only those changes. A shorter, more civil discussion ensued, and the pull request was merged 6 days later. I didn't change anything about the code. I didn't change my reasoning. He didn't change his reasoning. But you just give it 2 weeks to cool down, and you submit it in a different context, and suddenly, the code works fine. Changing the circumstances of the disagreement allowed me to resolve this quickly and easily. Another example. In August 2024, I opened this pull request. The goal was to remove all, or both, of the usages of the blank method in our code base and the active support dependency, which we only used for the blank method. It's an entire megabyte of code that we used for just 2 lines. The initial disagreement was, as you can see there, nothing too bad, just the entire principle of the change. They saw it as valuable, and I saw it as useless. As you can imagine, the following discussion failed to resolve this disagreement because we were just completely at cross purposes. So let's go to the reasoning behind the opinions. I didn't want blank because it pulled in active support, which is too big, and I didn't see anyone in the codebase that actively required it, that just genuinely needed it. But Satmandu wanted blank because even though we didn't explicitly need it at the moment, it was a safer option. It'll ensure we don't get unexpected errors when methods return nil. And once we go down to that reasoning and that logic, I can start to agree. No one likes nil errors, and we were able to compromise on a solution. You can see in the bottom right there that re-implemented blank locally, which kept the safety, the nil safety, but dropped the dependency. Another one. This disagreement happened on a pull request to introduce RuboCop, which is a Ruby code linter formatter as part of our CI, and the config that came along with it. The specific rule in contention was one to freeze strings that would otherwise be mutable, which saves a little bit of memory, but at the cost of a little bit of readability. Basically, if you put .freeze in the end of every string, it looks kind of ugly. So initially, I tried reasonings. I explained, well, we save memory, and then UberHacker said, well, the disk space, and I said, it's really not that much disk space, 328 bytes. That didn't work. That wasn't enough to change mine, so I needed to do something else. First, I reduced the scope of this agreement. Confirming up there, the only thing holding this pull request back, which was about 11,000 lines of code, was about this one config rule that applied to 47 strings. So you've gone from the whole pull request being held back to just this. It's the only thing holding it back. And that still didn't work, so I just brought in a 5th opinion. We had 2 for and 2 against. And Satmandu was also against. So, go with the majority view, and I disabled the rule, and the pull request moved on. And with the benefit of hindsight, I was wrong. Happens. This was the right thing to do. Manually frozen strings look really, really ugly. And in a few releases, Ruby is going to automatically freeze all strings anyway, so really I was just thinking ahead. That's all the good examples. Now, how not to resolve technical disagreements. The following is just a collection of instances where I definitely failed to effectively resolve technical disagreements. They serve as reminders of what can happen if things spiral out of control, and why it's a really important skill to be able to have as a developer to solve them. So if you can see on the left there, that's 5 approvals in 1 day. So this disagreement occurred with the specific details of an urgent fix to the way we detect the user space architecture of a target machine. We weren't able to reach an agreement, so I just requested changes to block the pull request. They marked them as resolved and approved. I requested, and that went on back and forth for basically the whole day. This all happened in 1 day, and it was a school day for me. So the only reason the merge went through is I had to leave class, close my laptop, put it in my bag, and walk to the next class, during which they merged a pull request. This caused our installer to be broken for a day longer than it needed to be. It also everyone was kind of mad. I stepped away for a week because it does not feel like this is an effective way to resolve disagreements. I felt like I had been overruled and they hadn't listened to me. But the moral of the story is you argue out the details of the bug fix after you fix the bug. Merge it, and then once you've a working production, go back and argue out the minutiae. That was the only thing. That was the entire change that we were arguing about. And that broke our installer for 2 days, and one of those days could have been fixed at the start if I had just swallowed my pride. So this is another pull request. As you can see, I opened it in 2021, and it was merged in 2025. I opened this pull request in September 21 to lay the groundwork for re-adding Triforce support to Dolphin. Relatively simple, a little under 400 lines of code, and the goal was a quick merge, and I do some follow-up pull requests. Now, due to my experience with C++ and the Dolphin code base, and just the team as a whole and open source development, it took a while for me to get reviewed, respond to the reviews, and then I had a few features I wanted to put in there. Still, that was all wrapped up by January 2023. I requested one last review, and we'll finally get to the merge. 2023 and 2025. 2 years pass. Nothing happens. Literally nothing happens before external attention, just this guy saying, "What's going on?" caused the review process to start back up again. It was merged 3 months later. This isn't like a technical disagreement in the conventional sense, but things clearly could have gone a little bit better. It should not take a year to review each 100 lines of code. And there were some consequences to the 4-year delay. By the time it got merged, it was clear that my initial plan of a quick merge and a bunch of follow-up pull requests, that's just not going to happen. Granted, the second pull request probably wouldn't have taken 4 years to get merged now that I had a little more experience, but things had changed over that period. I largely stepped away from the project, I had taken on additional responsibility, joined additional teams, and I had lost most of my knowledge and certainly most of my interest in the work, and I was in no state to pick up where I left off all those years ago. I'd also graduated. I started this in high school, and it was merged when I was in the first year of university. Thankfully, someone much more capable than me took up the task of re-adding Triforce support. They opened a comprehensive pull request in April 2025, and it was merged 3 days ago, and it in itself resolved from disagreements that have been dating back over a decade. That's about it. Thank you to our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be here. And bingo, although I will tell you, none of you do the bingo, because then I have better odds of winning all those prizes. Just some Q&A, and I guess some disclaimers. Thank you all for your time. This is my first time speaking at a conference, so hopefully it was entertaining, informative, or both. These techniques were based on my experience with open source teams, little in the way of formal practice. I don't know if they'll be as good in a corporate setting, but if you try them, please let me know how they go. I'm on most platforms as Zoopolis4. I chose it when I was 13. And my email address is on my GitHub. That's it.
Any question, guys?
Just a quick one. Are you presenting with a Wii remote?
Yes. I didn't feel like getting a slide clicker, and this works.
During my bachelor's, I was a open source contributor for OpenPGP. And one of the things that I've seen is that I've written a piece of code, and the maintainer was like, he had a lot of questions. And after a point of time, I've seen somebody else write the same code in a much better way. And that blew my brains out. Because what am I doing over here? Have you had such experiences with this?
Yeah, so with that pull request earlier, I was essentially taking someone else's code that they had abandoned, and I was learning C++ for the first time. It was definitely not my best work, and they came back a few years later and just did their own code and brought it back to a much better standard. But I mean, you learn. At some point, everyone is learning for the first time, and I think it's just valuable to keep an open mind and always come at it from the perspective of, how do I get this done? How do I, agree with them? How do I get more knowledge, and how do I move things along? But yeah, I've definitely had the experience of just trying something and seeing someone else do it way better. And especially if that person is the one reviewing my code and they say this is terrible and completely show me how it's done, it's embarrassing, but you learn.
Hi. I was wondering if you've, like me, put yourself in the situation that you've been better at arguing and then realised later, after winning it, that you were wrong, and how you've avoided putting yourself in this position again.
I can't say that I have, unfortunately. I continue to make mistakes to this day. I think I was young. I was there was certainly a bit of arrogance there initially. There were some pull requests that I didn't bring up where I wanted to refactor a JSON file as a series of function calls. There was some ugly stuff there that I initially was just, I'm right and they're wrong. So I can't say that I will never be wrong again, but I'll do my best. But when I'm wrong and someone else points out that I'm wrong, I think what I've learned is, take all that feedback, accept it, and it doesn't matter if you're wrong if you just keep going. If you say, all right, I'm wrong, my bad, and you change your mind. It's if you just sort of get stuck on that for 4 years, then that's when it really does damage. So just resolve the disagreements, admit you're wrong, you aren't always right, and things will go smoothly. As smoothly as they will, as they can.
You talk about arguing for your own point, but what if you're on the opposite side, where you feel like you have a bit more knowledge or you have your own opinion, but at the same time you're trying to avoid arguments? So how do you do that opposite, where you, instead of avoiding and just following whatever anyone says, how do you go to that point where you feel like you are speaking up for yourself and you're trying to argue for a point that you think that is correct?
Yeah, so I will say the advantage of working in code and technical things is there is an objective element to it. Your code may be faster or shorter or cleaner, and if you know more, you can generally, this won't work on everyone, but you go back to the reasoning behind the opinions, not just the opinions, and if you gradually convince someone that, don't say that they're wrong, just try and convince them of this new perspective being right. Like, you can be in a situation of you know more than they do, but just be nice and convince them instead of trying to beat them down. I find that tends to work, but I don't have any magic solutions. These are just best I can do.
You've mentioned a couple of times about objective stuff and logic and reason. Have you had some disagreements where it's maybe drifted from a technical disagreement into what might be called a question of style? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, one thing comes to mind where I was arguing with someone about a test file, and I wanted the test file to have a static list of methods, and they wanted to be dynamically generated. And in that case, I just think it's better that our tests are static and don't rely on the input code. But if it's a question of style, then it doesn't matter as much if it's not objective, if there's multiple possible ways to resolve it. In that case, I would say bring in another person, because if you have 3 people on your team, it's better that 2 of them like the style and 1 of them doesn't. But if you can, try and reach an agreement, find a compromise, but also you have different styles to someone else, and that's okay. And Chrome, the team I work in, there's 3 of us, and I can immediately tell who wrote the code and what they were feeling while writing it, but all works. Actually, no, most of it works.
Do you have any examples from the open source communities you've worked in of like ground rules? Feel to me like a good solution from the corporate world. So you have sort of like organizationally imposed norms that often don't exist in open source projects, or maybe exist in weaker forms because you don't have the employment contract kind of binding you to it. Do you have any examples from open source where there have been really useful ground rules that have helped to avoid some of these disagreements?
Yeah, maybe. In Chrome, we've got a rule that you need 1 person to approve your pull request before it merges, and that's kind of a ground rule, but there's 3 of us, and 1 of us is always asleep at any given time, so if you really don't want someone else to block your code, I have at times been guilty of submitting it, requesting only 1 person to review it, and merging it while they're asleep, and then turning off the notification. I wouldn't say that's a helpful ground rule and a great way to do things, but it works. I would caution against, so as you said, I've done a lot of different projects, and sometimes I step into a project and they want me to sign code of conduct, contributor's license agreement. I have to go through 7 different CI pipelines, join 4 Slack channels. Some projects go too far on the ground rules that it makes it difficult, because I'm just there to contribute a one-line fix to the installer. I want to get in and out. I think it's better to err on the safe side because, yes, and you don't have the employment contract, but everyone wants to be here. They're all volunteers, so you have that shared bond of passion, and you're less likely to get like genuine bad actors. If you don't like this, then they're not here. And that's all we have time for. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.